Yeah, welcome
Five,
to I've Never Read
four. Oh,
Discworld.
sorry, I talked over you. Start again. It's going
Welcome.
great. It's going great.
It's take six. Welcome to I've Never Read Discworld. I'm Andy Luke, and it's my first lap around the Discworld circuit.
And this is PJ Hart. It's my second 0.64 times round the Discworld, probably at this rate. But who's counting? And this month we're tackling yet another one of my absolute favorites. Do you want to tell us what it is, Andy?
It is Feet of Clay, and it's easily entered my top five now. It was a lot of fierce competition. I don't know why I started off with Grand Prix metaphors. The back cover says there's a werewolf with pre-lunar tension in Ankh-Morpork, and a dwarf with attitude, and a golem who's begun to think for itself. And there's a really nice quote from Matt Seaton, writing for The Guardian. Like reading Tolkien, but with gags and good gags too.
Yeah, I seem to remember that quote being festooned on quite a lot of the paperbacks. Like that's it's just a good catch-all quote about Discworld, isn't it? And totally correct, totally justified as well. Yeah, really good way of kind of selling Discworld to other fantasy fans. I think it certainly hooked a few people in over the years, I'm sure. So back with the City Watch, back in Ankh-Morpork.
Yep, yep, all good.
Yeah, so for we won't have to listen to me whinge about how I wish that's where we were because we actually are there.
Yeah,
We're
well, top of the show, I've got this friend from politics circles, one angry pagan, and we got very enthused connections around the Discord thing, and but he has this dreadful habit of trying to spoil me, and I'm throwing out the shut ups left, right, and center. But he
danger.
so hyped this book. Uh, so I went in bearing in mind that the hype has cost me in the past, but
Mm.
absolutely deserved. One angry pagan, totally. And I know you've sung its praises as well, PJ.
Yeah, I've tried to kind of be a bit more reserved in that front for a couple of reasons. Yeah, the first one being I know that you're trying to be as fresh as possible when you read these books, and that really helps the podcast. But secondly, like I don't want to prove myself wrong. Like I some of these books I haven't read in a really long time. So if I like super hype one of them to you and then I start rereading it myself and I'm like, oh, maybe this wasn't as good as I thought it was. I've given Andy a bump steer. I don't want to like obfuscate things for you any further, but this is another one of those ones that is for sure improved for me on the rereading. I don't think there's really been any that have maybe some of the really early ones like Color of Magic and stuff. Maybe they weren't quite as enjoyable in a second read. I know I sort of said last time maybe some of the spoilers in Masquerade, like that plotting, because I knew the answers. I wasn't as invested in the mystery, but even though like there's some crime procedural stuff going on here as well, I think I did enjoy this more on what must be now my third or maybe fourth read.
Yeah, it's got so many elements in it. We have lately been sort of working without a script, and that was my intention going in. But what I did do was keep a diary, and that has gotten way out of hand.
Yes, this is our longest notes to date, and I have contributed exactly 6 words. Do you want to know out of how many? That'd be interesting. I contributed 6 words out of 2,342 words. This is the size of this document.
Mine, that many? Oh
I,
goodness.
there
Now,
might be
I
some.
must have read this in 2 weeks. I just sped for it, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. I looked at the page count and was like, "Oh right, I'm at page 220 somehow." And then I've left it sitting about. I usually stick stuff up here in the office or in the bookcase when I'm done, but this has been in my kitchen, just waiting for me to pick it up again. I think if I get rereading any of them, it'll be yeah, Fate of Clay.
Yeah, interesting. Again, just after what I just said about spoilers, I was about to say something that might constitute a spoiler for the next watch book. So I have to stop myself there. Otherwise, I'd make a liar out of myself immediately. But yeah, that's what attracted me to this series. I think probably when I was a bit younger is just how fast paced, how accessible the City Watch books were. And they very, very quickly rose to the top of my pile in terms of like, as soon as a new Vimes book came out, I would get that no matter what. I started buying the hardbacks, probably not with the next one, but with the one after. I think I've got most of the hardback watch books from then on. And the only reason I don't have them from around this time is because I couldn't afford them, basically.
I can completely understand that.
Yeah, and I
Both
did.
counts.
I think I've told this story before, so I'll keep it brief. But I did have a hardback copy of the first three books together. They used to be a hardback trilogy of Guards, Men at Arms, and Feet of Clay. And I was so skint one year, I couldn't afford to buy my sister a birthday present, so I just gave her that, and she lost it. I tried to get it back to use in the podcast, but it's gone. So yes, obviously still sore about that since I'm repeating that story once again. So I know, yeah, Andy's great. Every time we come on and he holds up his hard copy of the book, and I usually have to shamefully admit that I read it on Kindle or whatever. This time I took a step further back and I listened to the audiobook. And I thought, and I'm not a big audiobook fan. I don't like how, I don't, maybe it's just me. I find it hard to kind of fully pay attention because I can't just sit and stare at the wall and listen to a book. I have to do something else, and then that something else inevitably draws my attention and I stop paying attention to the book. But Feet of Clay is a book I read at least 2 times, maybe 3 times. And after I read like the first, or listened to the first couple of chapters, like it was so immediately familiar to me. I was like, yeah, this will be fine. I'll have no problems listening to this. I listened to it while I was doing a bit of work. I listened to it in the bath, listened to it walking in and out of town. And yeah, just what a delight. What a nice new way to experience a book that I was loved so much from my childhood.
So it's a new experience for you this time as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, I did, again, when I was a poor BBC trainee, I used my very, very first ever free Audible credits, I think, for a Discworld book that had just come out. I didn't want to buy the hardback. But yeah, so that was probably like at least 12 or 13 years ago. So it's the first time I've listened to an audiobook since then. And the only 2 audiobooks actually I've ever listened to from start to finish, both Discworld books. But they're just, I'm sure fans who are listening are maybe aware that they've just been kind of re-releasing them, redoing them. They're up there if you're paying for Spotify Premium. They all seem to be just sitting there, which is great. So I re-upped my Spotify subscription and I listened to the new version of Feet of Clay, which is Jon Culshaw. So UK listeners of a certain age, at least, will certainly be aware of him as quite a famous impressionist. Does all the famous politicians and has had various radio shows and TV appearances down through the years. So as you can imagine, they get their money's worth out of him doing all the voices.
There's a
There was mist coming off the river, and it was a cloudy night. He might as well have tried to see through white velvet. But he thought afterwards that there had been shapes out there, just beyond the lights spilling out into the road. A lot of shapes, watching him, carefully. He thought maybe there'd been very faint points of light.
And then Bill Nye reads the footnotes as himself, or I guess as the author, as Terry, which is quite an interesting little change of pace. So yeah, if you've got a Spotify and you want to listen, I'm not, Spotify unfortunately aren't sponsoring us, or neither are Penguin, who I think are releasing the books, but if they want to, please do get in touch.
there's an open invitation there. We're very good hosts. And let's jump right into this 1997 novel then.
Oh yeah. Do you want to do?
Would you like to take the first synopsis?
Certainly. Even the synopses have been shortened in this massive notes because it's just they're almost lost in the midst of Andy's reading diary, which is great. So yes, without further ado, part 1. A golem is sold and murders occur. Vimes ducks assassination and is measured for a coat of arms. The watch gains an alchemist. Captain Carrot explores his love of bakeries. Excellent synopsizing as per usual. I have a question for you straight out the gate. Since we sort of skipped over first impressions, this will be a kind of first impression-y kind of question. Did you know what a golem was going into this?
Yes, however, it took me a little bit of time to put two and two together. So you're a child of the 80s, PJ. I'm a child of the ish. He's waving
80s
his
slash
finger
90s.
about radio
Yeah.
listeners.
Pretending to be younger than I am. But
I'm from the 70s, and there was a very weird thing in children's shows and children's comics as well in the 70s, where things were slightly not aligned with our universe. So there was this sort of gap where things were a bit askew, a bit peculiar, and golems would often pop up in the horrific fiction that we had to deal with. I mean, the most well-known golem is actually a fairly unfrightening one, and that's Morph, the animation
I
character
never,
by Tony Hart.
I never thought of Morph as a golem, but I guess he is. Yeah.
We had, I mean, we had shows like Tales of the Unexpected, probably one called Tales of Suspense, the
Yeah.
Collector Stories, and the Eagle comic, Blake Seven. So I've met golems before, but it's only with Feet of Clay that I was able to knit these weird creatures together and get a sort of a bigger notion of what they were. I know
Yeah.
that Lord of the Rings has a golem. Is that so?
Oh, you're testing me. Not to my, well,
Oh,
no, not. I mean, just write in and tell me I'm wrong. I'm not a huge Tolkien completist by any means. You could be definitely right. My first introduction to the concept of golems was this book. So I and should have gone back and done some more background reading before the podcast, but my vague understanding is that it's from like Jewish folklore, the sort of general idea. Certainly this specific idea with the words in the head and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the way that all the different kind of real world influences on of Ankh-Morpork are knitted together to create these stories is really fun. And like this is, yeah, as I say, to me, the sort of the concept of golems was quite left field. So really interesting actually, because then you don't necessarily know if you're not familiar with the tropes, you don't necessarily know what to expect if those kind of characters are at the center of the story. So yeah, I was just curious because I remember that probably being the only real hurdle for me the first time I read this was sort of just trying to conceptualize this concept. That's a terrible sentence.
yeah, I think Pratchett does a much better job of mapping out what a golem is than many of the other writers I've seen through the ages. I mean, there's a Doctor Who story in the John Pertwee, Roger Delgado era with a golem in it.
Okay.
But they're never quite as, I mean, Pratchett tells us about the words and really goes into detail about the words in the head. And that's always been a thing in golems, not necessarily having words in, lifting the skull up and putting a slip of paper in, but the idea of taking directions from a master.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of other writers haven't explained this as well as Vetinari does.
Yeah, and if not for that ability, for his ability to do that, I think I might have bounced off this maybe the way I did with some of the other bigger concepts where he assumes some knowledge, for example, of like Phantom of the Opera and things like that. Whereas I did sort of feel like he maybe was aware that this was a slightly more esoteric concept, that like not everybody's going to be familiar with, Jewish folklore or whatever. So yeah, he sort of holds our hand a little bit more as he introduces us to the golems and kind of talks us through what they are, how they work. And then that segues really smoothly into what their role in the story is going to be. So yeah, I thought it was really good. Yeah, it took me from knowing nothing or anything about this kind of stuff to like being really invested in it, probably within this section, within part one,
I think I'm probably going to read out snippets from my diary, just straight. So I kept this as I was deep in the reading. So about the guards, they feel so solid that they really teach us Ankh-Morpork smells and sludge, and it shows the order and the layout, and they touch the walls for us. It's quite a tangible, tactile thing. I like Cheri. I thought Cheri got a wonderful launch in, very competent individual. Detritus has settled in quite well. He feels like one of the proper first generation now. And Angua, this book does so much with Angua that by the end of it, I felt she was there too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And sometimes, in the midst of time, when I think about, that core group of the Watch, I actually sort of forget that Detritus was introduced in moving pictures. Like the core group of the Watch for me is Nobby, Colon, Vimes, Detritus, Carrot, and Angua, and Cheri. Probably like at least with half of it in there, if not more. And that's because that's the core group in this book. And yeah, again, without giving too much away, like it sort of took a while for the core group of wizards to solidify, and then we were off to the races. So this is kind of the core, for me anyway. This feels like the core group of the Watch, kind of solidifying as well. I know this is going to get boring, and I'm going to try to not do it too much. Talking about the voices that Jon Culshaw does in the book.
Bring it on in.
Cheri is like working class sort of Glasgow accent. is quite good and makes some of her kind of put upon moments really quite funny, and then her kind of meek moments where she wants to talk about dresses and jewelry like contrast really well with that. That the humor in like dwarfs talking about girly stuff kind of comes out because you've got Jon Culshaw with like a really kind of brash Glaswegian accent doing the same thing. It really works. It really captures the spirit of that gag. Yeah, as I say, I'll try not to ruin it too much. I know people probably do want to listen to those books, and there are some nice surprises in them in the way that he handles certain characters. I'll maybe talk a little bit about Vimes, and then I'll try and leave it at that. Anything else kind of jumping out at you?
Yeah, well, let's go into the Vimes through way of the technological progress. There's quite a bit going on. He's got his sedan chair, which I'm not really sure. Got me interested. Is it a hand lifted chair or is it a rickshaw? I thought probably is going to be a sort of a wheelchair, but propelled like a bicycle. And then I thought about the cobblestones around Ankh-Morpork and the general dirt and crap of the street, and that's probably not going to be likely. That you're going to get a four-seated bicycle.
Yeah. So my again, this could be totally wrong. Write in and challenge us always. So my reading of it was that there was a guy at the front and a guy at the back, because I think it says he tells the guy at the front to get in. Which implies there's a guy at the back, which makes it feel really old school, like almost too old school. Like it's two guys, and they're each holding the thing, and then they're just walking through the streets. Whereas and that's probably totally wrong, but yeah, your version where it's a guy pulling a rickshaw. I think the guy's definitely walking, because Vimes' whole thing is that he wants to walk the streets. So yeah, but the question in my mind then is whether it's two guys, one at the front or one at the back, or whether it's one guy pulling a wheeled device, rickshaw type thing. And yeah, the rickshaw feels a bit more like where we're at in terms of the technological level of Ankh-Morpork at the moment, which is fair. Actually, just before we even get to that, like the scene that kind of made me remember, it's like, yeah, I could definitely just listen to this book, because this scene, I'll remember this scene almost word for word, is the assassination attempt on Vimes. Basically opens his story, and that version of the character who is rich and unhappy about being rich and ready to kind of drop all that and chase an assassin for any excuse like that. That's the version of Vimes that's the most kind of clearest in my imagination.
In my reading, it felt quite like played dramatically, quite thrilling and near fatal, but Vimes just shrugs all that off, and it's just another day for him. And like, yeah, he so has the assassin over a barrel pretty much.
Yeah, it is.
It's
That's
like
a good point.
swatting a fly.
Yeah, it's a it is a well written set piece for sure. And considering where we're going to get to towards the end, some of the set pieces do get quite complicated. So you sort of you feel reassured that he's going to be able to pull them off because you've had that really dynamic opening with the assassination attempt. I think. I mean, not that we ever doubt Terry's abilities when it comes to that stuff.
And High Society has also gifted Vimes a BlackBerry, or
Yeah,
five function imp.
yeah. I wonder. I mean, I have a vague recollection around this time. I guess 1997, 1998, of like I think that I don't think the NIO. So my dad worked for the NIO, which is the Northern Ireland office, which is kind of like the government branch of government at that time that sort of helped run Northern Ireland because we didn't have a devolved government. And I have a feeling he was issued some kind of PDA, personal data assistant thing around this time, or maybe if not that long after this. And it was I don't even have anything. But it was about the size of a paperback book, and it could do stuff like you had to plug it in to download your emails onto it and all this kind of stuff. So I know Terry was quite an early adopter with that kind of thing. So I wonder, did he have something like that in the 90s? I wonder what that would have been. Did you ever have anything like that?
I had a Palm Pilot,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this little mobile phone. Still got it in a drawer downstairs. That it opens up. I don't know what that signal is for people who are just listening to the podcast.
He
Um,
I think he's
but
indicating that a keyboard springs
a,
forth.
a keyboard slides and clicks out from underneath it, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
tiny little keys, each the size of a very small pea. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's yeah, Palm Pilot. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, the name just left me there. That would have been a fairly ubiquitous kind of brand for that sort of thing, wouldn't it have
actually,
been?
have I showed off my Alpha Smart in this podcast yet?
You've shown it off to me. I don't know if you've shown it off to
For
the
those
viewers
who
slash
have
listeners.
are with us on video, just behind me, I'm bringing out the Alpha Smart Neo, which is a very lightweight word processor. It's maybe about as heavy as a plate, and it does bounce quite well if you should drop it. It runs off 3 AA batteries, and these were come out in the mid to late 90s for students with learning difficulties, dyslexia, what have you, and have since become very popular amongst writers for their portability and durability. They're
So
very hard to get in the UK.
yeah, so for
Um,
those who aren't watching, it looks to me like a full size keyboard with an LCD screen that could hold about 3 lines maybe of writing.
as six, if it's
6 lines.
yeah,
So and I suppose the idea behind that is to keep you focused. So no distractions, just
no
you.
internet.
Word. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Could probably do with something like that.
But you've got a little dictionary on there, little thesaurus, word checker.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
I would
word
find a way
count.
to procrastinate just with those tools, I'm sure. I remember seeing I think the Oscars, the Academy did like a behind the scenes kind of thing with Eric Roth, the screenwriter who co-wrote June, which is why they were making that video with him. He was nominated for best adapted script, and he's written a bunch of other stuff, but he does something similar. He has this like ancient PC that's not connected to the internet that has this ancient screenwriting software that can only print 20 pages at a time. So once he's written one act, he has to stop and save it and print it so that he can then create a new file for the next act. So it can't even hold 21 pages, this thing. And he has it on floppy. He has them on floppy disks, you know. And this is how he wrote a script that he was nominated for an Oscar for in 2021, 2022. So yeah, I mean, obviously it works. It certainly works for some people.
I quite enjoyed the imp and the voice that the imp gives to the narrative. Beautifully distracting. A lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah, and I know I just promised I wouldn't, but you can imagine Jon Culshaw obviously having some fun with that, getting
Yeah,
quite
no, I wanted to hear about that.
getting quite high pitched and annoying with the imp voice. I mean, it really is an impressive feat because you've got imps in this. You've got the camera imp, you've got the organizer imp, you've got multiple trolls. You also have to give voice to the golems, And even before the golems can talk, spoilers, I guess, but I mean, when the golems are still just communicating with writing, he still gives them this like really deep kind of like otherworldly voice, like you would imagine a golem having, which is, yeah, it's no mean feat. I mean, I would hesitate to even imagine how many individual voices, characters are going on in this, you know? So yeah, definitely the right man for the job. It's one thing that sort of pissed me off, or has put me off audiobooks in the past, I think, unless they're like a full cast audio dramatization, which I do like, but I sort of find it hard to listen to one person droning on and on all the time. Apologies to the people listening to me droning on all the time right now. But I mean, Jon Culshaw just doesn't feel like one person, you know. He's definitely one of the best to ever do it.
A magician, yeah.
Yeah. So
Um, two more I want to throw up. Mr. Hopkinson trying to file a complaint with death. I was just reading this again before I came back on
yeah.
tonight, and yeah, it's inappropriate, it's bad timing. I pay my taxes.
Yeah,
Great
and that's a
stuff.
bit yeah, and that's a bit of a refrain. And he's the first to utter it, I think, in the book as well. You know, people saying that they pay their taxes and then they ultimately turns out they don't or haven't been paying their taxes. Yeah, funny to give that the first accusation of that to death of all people. And then it's the only things that are inevitable in life, isn't it? Or death and taxes. So. Yeah, and after that, I don't think we really see death again in this book, do we?
No, well, he might pop up for again, but it's maybe only a page or half page. It's certainly a much smaller role than any of the other books, I think.
Yeah, definitely one of the smaller ones for sure. Um, and then so then and what's great about this section, and I it's the whole business of Vimes putting off going to the coat to get his coat of arms done, and that's really clear inherent character building for Vimes. Although I mean, arguably it's character building that's already been done, but like we know that Vimes is the kind of person who doesn't care about that sort of thing. Obviously, he's going to put off his appointment. So this visit he has to the coat of arms people, whatever their
With
official
the
title, the heralds.
paintings, with
Yeah,
the animals, it's
yeah, yeah.
absolutely ridiculous and it shouldn't work, but it so does.
Yeah, but what I love about it in particular is that it feels like this, yeah, bit of character building for Vimes and then quite a good comedy set piece, and it doesn't need to be any more than that. But then the fact that it becomes this really intrinsic part of the whole murder mystery, you know, you're not really expecting it, but it feels totally earned because it's one of the first scenes in the book. You know, it's in the first, yeah, eighth of the quarter of the book, certainly. Anyway,
Do you know,
so
it
yeah.
made me think of when I was living in Oxford and I would walk down the main street. And if
Oh,
you've
of
ever
course.
been down there, there's all these colleges with like open gates, but then you wander in the gate like about through the archway for about 5, 6 paces, and there's fences and things are closed off. And all you can do is look through the gap at the big quad with the buildings around it. And that's what this coat of arms gaff felt like to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And you sort of have this like feeling that all these animals that are set up at the start, you're like, you don't know why you're gonna see them again, but like
Yeah.
it's such an elaborate setup that like this has to pay off somehow, all these weird animals. And even there's the idea that coats of arms have to be drawn from life. It's a very Terry Pratchett kind of thing, isn't it? You're like, well, who gets the unicorn to stand up on its hind legs? You know?
We get some really rich history on Vimes' ancestor, Stoneface, who
Yeah.
I think it's been hinted before, but this is a deep dive that he's essentially the Jamie Lannister of Discworld, the King Killer.
Yeah, it's a much deeper dive than we've had before. It's first mentioned in Guards, and we learn a lot more about the circumstances and why he did it and what happened after he did it and all that kind of stuff, which is great. And so hard not to say more, but like,
I quite like the sound of him.
yeah, I like the cut of his jib, his stony faced jib. And yeah, we were sort of meddling with it in Men at Arms a little bit, but the kind of class politics, I guess, of Ankh-Morpork is really front and center this time around, and this is kind of where we see Vimes starting to openly kind of talk about that and muse on it, and the kind of the unfairness, I guess, of the kind of the class, for I was going to say the feudal system, but it's the tension. Part of the tension in this book is the conflict between like the old ways of the feudal system, the old money, and then the new money with the guilds and the merchants and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it still just boils down to the who has the money and who has the power, and who doesn't. And yeah, I think this is about as openly kind of an open discussion, as open a discussion about class as we've had in Discworld so far, probably. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. From the off, there's there's the theme of class and a theme of capitalist industrialization gone mad, both very much coming to the fore and run throughout the book, and generally not always, they're kind of ever present, but modest. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're wrapped. And again, this is when this is done well, like you can sneak so many big ideas out into like fairly mainstream stories by just wrapping them in a murder mystery, like you know, uh, and this is a great one for sure. So
Just to
yeah,
say, my Corgi edition
oh yeah.
had the pictures of the coats of arms at the start. Do you remember
Oh,
that from your
um,
prints?
very vaguely remember it being in the hard copy. But I did have that. I did have that Corgi edition, or maybe I didn't have it, but I read it for sure. Hold them up if anybody's watching. Have you got them?
Let's see. This might be tricky. There we go.
Ah, yeah, yeah,
So I will try and take a photo of these and stick them alongside the video edition.
yeah. So I was like, I made him show me them, and then I didn't really have anything to say about them. So, yep, they're nice.
Yeah, I did get the magnifying glass out, but they appear to be in Latin, which is a dead language.
I want to say one last thing about the voice acting, because we've talked at length about like fan casting and who we would cast as Vimes and stuff like that. Uh, so Jon Culshaw does a very clear riff on Sean Bean as Vimes, and it really, really works. So I know I've been big, and I defend, even the one thing I will defend about the Watch TV series is the casting of Richard Dormer, and Vimes will always have a Belfast accent in my head, but Sean Bean as Vimes via Jon Culshaw was really, really good. It really, really worked. And yeah, just that whole slightly like put upon, like his reaction to the assassination is just like, this again. You know, that's like world weary, but still a bit of a hero. Like, like if, yeah, like you can picture it. You can picture Sharp coming home from the war and then becoming a cop in like Napoleonic Britain, that kind of vibe. Yeah, it worked really well. So that's the last thing I'll say. We'll just talk about the book from now on, I promise.
Part 2. Vimes and Donut Jimmy attend when Vetinari is reported as unwell. Angua's nose takes her to Ignace Potter Troll. The city respects a holy day for golems, followed by a confession. Nobby also takes unwell. Okay, where do we start? Shall we just go in with the big one? Vetinari poisoned.
Yeah.
My diary records that this is where the Watch are best in my limited experience. It's a dragon level challenge. It affects all of Ankh-Morpork. Um, and there's also suggestions that Vimes is in the frame for attempted murder too. So this is as big a challenge as I could conceive of at this point.
Yeah, in a weird way, I sort of have to feel for Terry. When he started this series, the City Watch series, the threat in the first book was like, yeah, it was a dragon destroying the city. And you're like, oh, right, well, geez, where do we go from there? And I think, yeah, just delving into the political intrigue of it, they're basically, so if you think about these first three books as a trilogy, which I always will, because I used to have them in a single volume, uh, it is just like somebody tries to overthrow Vetinari essentially in each book, whether it's a dragon or whether it's a vampire in this one. Um, I think there's something quite neat about that, but they all feel like their own distinct story with something else to say. So it's slightly like not as black and white though, as like he's not being assassinated with a gun. They're just going to try to sideline him. It feels a bit more subtle. It feels a bit more like Terry's enjoying the political side of it, like the actual political reality of what that would be like a little bit more.
Yeah, although we don't know that until quite a bit of the way through the book.
Yes, of
So
course.
at,
Yeah.
at this point, it feels very much like, all these connections across the city Vetinari has, or everybody is kind of almost dependent on him. And he's going down, so it's going to be chaos. And we do see that explored with the guild heads meeting. And yeah, it feels big. Feels as big
Yes.
as you can go.
Yeah. It's a good way to draw in all those those kind of characters, because we only really see the guild heads when they're up to no good, I suppose, and they're regularly up to no good. But there's something quite comforting and cathartic in that. That it's almost like a chorus of villains that could be trotted out, and it could always be any of them. So you've got this ready-made who done it. Anytime anybody tries to make a big move in the city, and they all inhabit the character of their profession. So like the Bogus of the Thieves Guild, and this Doctor what's his face from the Assassin's Guild. Like they inhabit the character of those professions in that archetypal comedic way that makes all the scenes with them really, really interesting and really, really fun.
Vimes is handling this totally hands on. He's not trusting. What's the line about not trusting doctors? Oh, I want him to live.
Yeah.
So he gets in Jimmy, the horse doctor, who does sound rather suspect, but is largely to be trusted. And he's Vimes taking over the palace, posting guards everywhere, getting everything checked and double checked. This leads into getting a number of minor new guard characters. Constable Downspout
Oh yeah.
is inspired.
Gargoyle. Yeah.
Gargoyle on building. Constable Visit with his constant attempt to evangelize and convert everybody is just well, we all have met that person, right?
Quite so. And I love that connection to small gods there, because that's the religion from small gods, is omnism or whatever, that was all bloodthirsty and all that the last time we met them, and then after Brother took over and made them stop killing everybody, now this is their new thing. They have to
Aren't we lucky I show up to this podcast? things we learn.
Yeah. So yeah, instead of being all blood and thunder and Old Testament, now they're all Jehovah's Witnessy with the pamphlets and stuff, which it's a really, really nice touch. And I forgot how it paid off. I sort of like, I was laughing along with it this time, and I was like, where does this go? And then obviously we'll get to it later on when it's like Visit versus Dorfel.
Yeah. Oh, well.
There's quite a lot of intricate plotting going on here, because you've got the golem related murder mystery, and then the big escalation on that, as you already said, the poisoning, and how much each of those plots moves in this section, plus the extra character dynamics that have to be set up. Sort of touched on them a little bit, but one that I see that you mentioned in your notes is Cheri and Angua and their burgeoning friendship and the potential ticking time bomb underneath that. We learn, I think here, that Cheri hates werewolves.
Yeah.
So we know something's going to come out of that. While we've also got this like political poisoning going on, old men being murdered and stuff. So there's a lot of balls in the air. And is this also where Nobby's earldom starts to come into it as well, which feels like
Let's consult my diary. The
indeed.
other focal character is Nobby. Some little touches, his multiple grandmother's funerals, his being involved in reenactments. It's not quite clear what Terry is doing with Nobby regarding the whole Earl business, but that'll pay off in a big way. His reaction to the earldom is fun, and there's some good-natured joshing by Colon. Also, real surprise that Colon is to retire. How?
Yeah, I had forgotten one of the details I had sort of forgotten was that, yeah, why does Colon give up on retirement? And the payoff for that's really funny.
Yeah,
Because he's talking about wanting to get back to the soil and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, again,
journey has taught him differently.
yeah, and because we all sort of know that, like, once you get a gang like this together, you don't really break it up. Like, we think we all sort of know in our hearts that Colon isn't going to retire, and it's just a matter of why. So that pays off great. Yeah, like the whole business with Nobby and his earldom, like, feels, again, it's really good plotting because it feels like it could just be a comedy runner, something that's just kind of happening in the background. Like, wouldn't it be funny if Nobby was an earl? Like, that's just something you would just throw out as a
Yeah.
gag, which again ends up having a really important part in the overall story. So yeah, I love that. All those little pieces coming together. They're all set up, not too much at once. They're dripped through the first third of the book really cleverly.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Oh, let's talk about the Vimes shoes again. Where he trades his stately boots for a pair of knackered old souls and just runs through the city. I think he's chasing someone at the time, but it feels so real, such a great character beat.
Yeah, he's chasing one of the golems through the fog, which uh, again in the audio is just nice and cinematic. You know, it's really just like the assassination. It's a really well written action set piece. It's got great tone. It's got real atmosphere, and all that's really elevated by the fact that Vimes is essentially navigating his way through the city just using the soles of his feet. And yeah, I mean, something I didn't mention at the start, and I do remember throwing me very slightly the first time I read it. Like, Feet of Clay is a weird name for a book.
Yeah, and
Like,
it works in so many levels.
yeah, and yeah, Vimes's sort of obsession with being connected to the streets through his feet, and yeah, obviously the footprints of Clay are a major clue in the kind of first stages of the investigation. So yeah, it all makes sense for sure in the context of the story. But if you pick that book off the shelf, it doesn't scream that, like, this is going to be a fantasy murder mystery. I don't know what you think it's going to be. It's going to be about, like, pottery or something.
Well,
Which I
it
mean it
is,
is,
yeah.
yeah, which is fair. But it's
There's
underselling it just a smidge.
I mean, we know this about Vimes from previous books. He likes to feel the city underneath his feet, but there's a lovely moment in this metaphor story where he tries on these old boots and he gets disorientated and he doesn't know the city because it's fair to stated that he has become a little bit used to Sybil's lifestyle and he's out of touch and this sort of disorientation it comes even before he gets knocked on his ass by his apprehender, the golem, or
Yeah,
somebody else. So, yeah, it's a really nice way of seeing that metaphor through.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's something that it was set up as a really big part of his character, and the tension between the old version of Vimes and this new version of Vimes is at the heart of this book. You know, it's why he puts off that appointment at the start and everything. So yeah, I love how kind of cohesive all that is for sure.
So you mentioned there Cheri and Angua. I'm just going to read something else from the diary.
Oh, the glasses are on.
There's
It's serious.
a lot of great comments on bigotry in this book. You've got Vimes distrust Nobby and Colon, and they're getting the confession from Dorfel. You've got Cheri's prejudice, as you mentioned. Um, the prejudice is that she's seen through being in Angua's home and Angua's secret bar. And also, this does it bit to flesh out Angua's own psychological narrative.
Mm. Yeah, I agreed. And yeah, the fact that she has the Ubervaldian bar, I guess, you know, it's got all sorts of real world connections there. You know, whether it's like kind of a safe place for immigrants, or whether it be a safe place for LGBT people. Obviously, they're both those metaphors are at play here in this book. But what I particularly like about all that stuff is that even though Angua is kind of the center of it in terms of, like, she's on the receiving end of this prejudice, she is in turn prejudiced against golems. And that feels really like, you know, the grays of those situations where even people who are themselves, you know, experiencing hardship, you in a lot of cases, all that means, that makes them just want to pass it on. Like, you know, being on the receiving end of hardship just makes people mean sometimes, you know, and that it's not just black and white. It's not just like these poor downtrodden masses with hearts of gold and all that. You know, they have their own prejudices and their own problems as well. So it feels really fleshed out
It,
and
it
really
does. It's
real.
really all there, and it hadn't actually struck me in the terms you describe it. But when I was reading this, I mean, there's a wonderful case made for golems as capitalism gone mad. Um, but golems are creepy fuckers. They make my skin crawl.
Yeah.
And what is so interesting, what Terry goes on to do, is to take that and turn it on its head, where you feel really bad for the golems, you feel really sympathetic, and yeah,
For
turns that
sure.
genre bigotry on its head.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a really, again, once again, like Terry, so ahead of his time. You know, again, this is the mid to late 90s when this is being written, and you've got, yeah, these workers, the golems that are essentially being worked 24 hours a day, like the golem that's running an assembly line, like that. I couldn't imagine a better metaphor for an Amazon procurement center than that. And that's like 15, 20 years before that issue was really coming to people's attention. So yeah, absolutely. Really, really prescient stuff as always.
Fortunately, we've seen this sort of decade of dehumanization of immigrants and asylum seekers, and um, certainly the trans community,
Mhm.
and LGB to a lesser extent. And it's just, yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's a good a time
so,
as any to just bring up that whole thing with Cheri. And again, it's handled really, really well. It's something that jumped out to me a little bit more as I was listening to it this time. Again, because maybe because these issues are a bit more to the forefront in society too. But like when Cheri changes her pronouns in the book, doesn't really get remarked on. The narrator just starts using she, and that's fine. And then when Cheri, and I'm not, maybe not sure if I ever really picked up on this fully, but there's a point where she says she wants to be known as Cheri, and again, the narrator just, anytime she's referred to, it's as Cheri. Um, in the narration, and it's not made a big deal out of or whatever. It's just like, yeah, okay, this is who this person feels that they are, so that's who they are, and that's basically the end of the discussion.
that's simple.
Yeah, and that's how it should be, you know. And I know there's been, not for a few years at least, but there have been sort of various bubblings up in the past about what Terry would have thought about the whole situation with trans rights and stuff. And I think Rihanna has come out and pretty swiftly shut down any speculation on that, and uses the character of Cheri as a pretty clear example of
Yeah,
what Terry
yeah,
thought, you know.
pretty clear. Just like you say, a fairly blatant example. And I mean, I don't like to demonize people, but it does speak to the vulturism of these hate mobs. When evidence is right in front of them, and they choose to other people, and they're not really interested in having a discussion, or trying to compromise or work towards um, a solution where everyone's happy. It's just um, it's a binary. It's a you're bad, I'm good
Yeah,
scenario, and yeah,
I think
it's
this
sad.
is, yeah, it is, and it's quite sobering as well, you know, because I think this serves as an example that, like, I mean, this interpretation probably was a little bit ahead of its time in 1997, but this book came out with an obvious trans character in 1997. It's handled really simply, really well. Not oversimplistically by any means, but in terms of like somebody identifies a certain way, so that's who they are. Within a few years of this book coming out, a trans person won Big Brother, think that was in the early 2000s. At around the same time, the most watched event on British television was a wedding between a cis man and a trans woman on Coronation Street. And again, there was no outrage about that. There was no protests about that. Nobody was calling for Coronation Street to be cancelled or Big Brother to be cancelled. And the fact that we've moved so far backwards in the 20 years since then, I think when you read something like this from that time period, it becomes so obvious how manufactured that debate has become. How the outrage is being stoked quite deliberately, because like that sort of backsliding in attitude over the course of just a couple of short decades doesn't feel natural to me by any stretch. Anyway.
Well said, PJ. Thank you.
I think we're still in line for that sponsorship, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're not going to be carried by the Daily Mail now, it looks like.
Maybe the next part we could talk about Israel and Palestine. Yeah. On that note, yeah, so I'll get down off the soapbox, and I'll read the introduction to part 3, which is: the watch endure a night out, and Cheri Littlebottom comes out. Terror befalls the golems. The patrician's health worsens, and detritus rounds up culprits. The heads of the guilds plan to restore order, and Vimes returns home. Arsenic is the poison, but nothing to do with wee mad Arthur. I do love wee mad Arthur.
Yeah. Oh, he's rabid.
This is the first appearance of wee mad Arthur, isn't it?
I believe it is, yeah.
I can't even remember if he comes back, but he just such a larger than life presence in this book. It sort of feels like he's, I was about to say he's larger than life.
It took me a little while to grasp the size of him, that he's not like a dwarf, he's like palm-sized.
Yeah, so I think the distinction in the arbitrary classes of Discworld races is that he's a gnome.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, not helpful. Yay, hi.
My notes say not friendly to police inquiries, a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, also quite Scottish in the audio play, which I don't think there's any option. He's either had to be Scottish or Irish, I suppose.
Nobody's going to argue with that, because you don't argue with wee mad Arthur.
Exactly, yeah. So it's good. Yeah, really really good performance there again. And
we kick off this sequence with near 15 pages of quality drinking scenes between Hobbs and Colon getting blitzed, and the introduction of the bucket in Gleam Street as the Watch's preferred drinking den, which I think is really smart. And all this drinking is perfectly mandatory. It's an essential part of a guard's book, I feel. Am I getting there?
I think it's an essential part of all Discworld books. There's always at least one good proper drinking session in pretty much all the books, which I have a huge soft spot for. Yeah, I think actually it's a good point. The fact that these two scenes basically play off each other, or they're possibly even intercut with each other, means that the Watch can't have the Mended Drum as their pub. Because that's the pub we always go to in Ankh-Morpork, isn't it? So that means we have to have another pub. So yeah, the idea of having that kind of place where just policemen go is interesting, and it fleshes out the world and it fleshes out the Watch. Whereas meanwhile, Nobby and Colon are going off the reservation and having a really big session in the Mended Drum.
I mean, I would imagine most of the Mended Drum's customers have been in custody at some point or another a dozen times.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does make sense that like that wouldn't be their place, but yeah, fair. That the world is that world has been constructed already, so like the Watch, I guess, probably wouldn't really be welcome there, with the possible exception of Nobby and Colon.
Yeah,
because they're the kind of watchmen who look the other way, especially if they're off duty, I suppose. So.
Loved having a few pages with the guys on the bridge. I feel like we should have a clever name for them, like the 4 horsemen of the alcoholics licked, or the 4 men who fell off and got kicked by a horse.
Yeah, I'm wary of spoilers, but like, did the beggars have a gang name? If they haven't been really anointed with one yet, anyway. Oh no, yeah, it is the Canteen Crew.
The Canteen Crew.
Canteen, Canting. I can't remember where that name originates. I'm gonna click a link. I just googled it, which is not great listening to me read off Wikipedia, but
And yeah, you always do this. You'll go off on a tangent when I'm just about to burp or something like that, and or
I just
hiccup.
hold it in.
Yeah, I
It's
can't
fine.
hold it
We
in.
can always. That's what editing's
Yeah,
for. That's fine.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
This isn't going on iTunes. This bit.
so yeah, I'm not quite. Yeah, well, maybe I have to come back to that. But yes, that is their name. Apparently, is the Canting Crew. I can't remember if that came
What
from
a
soul music or
what
if
a
it.
wonderful miasma they are.
Yeah, yeah, and like that they would be like front and center of any other book series. You know, they're such vivid, interesting characters, and they basically just wander in and out of Discworld. But always good that Gaspode, that Gaspode is still kicking around.
We got, yeah, Cheri comes out. We mentioned, my notes say it feels unusual in how covert she is. I dare say female readers would have a closer POV in this. Tomboys versus normative typified looks.
Yeah, yeah, I think
I think he
yeah,
did a much better job just before of explaining how this situation sort of extends into our world. And I think, I mean, so I didn't really feel the Cheri to Cheri in the same way, but it's almost as if I'm kind of not meant to because, or I'm only meant to feel so much of it because, oh no, I'm gonna have to edit something in. I've completely
no, that's
lost
fine. I can pick
myself
up on
there.
that. Yeah, I think I can see what you're getting at there because I do think there's a gag that's almost slightly lost in the audiobook version around this because I think what I took from it, reading it off the page, was that Cheri and Cheri, I think I probably would have said it to myself as I was reading it, that those names are so similar as to almost be interchangeable. And that's kind of the gag, is that like she's made this big thing about changing her name to basically the same name. And I think I sort of felt that was the gag when I read it on the page, but Jon Culshaw makes that this choice to pronounce it sh rather than ch for Cheri. So yeah, so I don't know if that's a gag missed just for the sake of clarity or what, but yeah. So I think this whole business of dwarfs, like with so much more postmodern fantasy now, you know, that like the idea of a stereotypical Tolkien dwarf or like a Dungeons and Dragons dwarf or whatever is like almost he doesn't even bother explaining that in this. It's just like dwarfs are
Right.
big, round dudes with beards. That's what they are. So any kind of subversion of that feels like a big deal in this book at this time, whereas we're used to kind of things like Game of Thrones or whatever, where like fantasy tropes are subverted and stuff like that. Where Terry was kind of at the forefront of doing that, but now it feels a bit more normal. It was much more radical, I think, at this time, when this book was written. So just the idea that some dwarfs even are women, it feels like a big deal. And it's a concept that he loves playing with, and the idea that they're women but they still have beards, but even though they have beards they still want to be feminine is like, yeah, once you start getting into it, it's surprisingly naughty. It's like quite an interesting concept, and I still think he's played with it more in this book than any other kind of like postmodern fantasy interpretation that I've come across. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but yeah.
Another thing that's interesting is that we're kind of told this from Cheri's perspective, that she's trans, and I'm speaking for myself. I'm not trans. I believe Terry wasn't trans, but he does a very good job of filling that life in Cheri, which is a great pun as well, by the way.
Mm.
And it's kind of it's for the people who aren't that and are kind of vocal about being against being trans. It can't really understand that narrative.
Mm.
And I think perhaps Terry is trying to trying to put that across here. Is to give a sense of that sort of alien or other that you might find in a troll. Trolls are, for me, not being a big fantasy buff, kind of hard to relate to.
Yeah, yeah, I see where you're coming from there. Yeah, and although like there's no point beating about the bush, in terms of what the metaphor here is. Obviously, Cheri's character is a metaphor for transgender people. Like the fact that within the world of Discworld, she's not technically transgender. She's always been a female dwarf, but she just wants to express her gender identity in a really radical way.
Yeah.
So even that, opens up all these interpretations. It feels quite ahead of its time, and even thinking about non-binary identities and things like that, as you say, in a way that people here just have their minds closed to this, that will just never understand.
And actually, it's really talking about social models as well, because um, Cheri is transvestite, but that is socially defined.
Mm.
A woman recognized as a man in the disc who is rebelling against that recognition. Of course, we've just had a very big case with the Olympics or was the boxing with a female athlete who was classed as a male and then had a lot of trolls, the bad kind, having a go at her and pouring out hate online over something that they completely factually misunderstood.
Yeah, it was just all, yeah, it was essentially made up. Yeah, so I sort of feel like, yeah, in discussion of this, we've probably made some slightly sweeping statements about what this metaphor is or what it means. And I think really what it comes down to is that the brilliance of the character of Cheri is that like she can mean so many different things to so many different people who are going through these kind of issues, with their own identities and how their identities are expressed. And I think that's the real absolute genius of the character. And I think people must have known coming into this episode there would be a lot of chat about those issues. So yeah, hopefully they were prepared. But there's some other stuff
Go
going
ahead.
on here that's a bit. I mean, yeah, like we can talk about those issues till we're blue in the face, but neither of us, I don't think, have any direct personal experience of them. But the thing that I remember really actually sticking with me the first time I read this, and it stuck with me again this time, is the whole Vimes returning to Cockbill Street and his kind of
Yeah,
working class origin
my
story.
favorite scene of the book, I think. Yeah, just amazing.
Yeah, and
You can picture that on TV or in this Discworld swimming in reality is what
yeah.
I've written in my notes, and it's amazing.
Where do you picture when you picture Cockbill Street?
I do picture Belfast. I picture Summerall Street in East Belfast. I picture this actually also as like a play by Martin Lynch,
Mm,
or being put on a local theatre. I feel I've walked Cockbill Street.
yeah,
I feel
yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, like the street that my dad grew up on in North Belfast, in Newington Avenue, and the street where my mum's auntie had a house. But the house is still there, but she's not on Kent Street, which is right in the middle of Belfast. So a quick indulgence for our local listeners. Do you know where the Sunflower Bar is?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So if
brilliant
you
bar.
walk, yeah, yeah, great. So if you
Very
walk out,
Discworld bar, I think.
yeah, it's got a bit of the men to drum about it for sure, with a cage out the front and everything. So if you step out of the Sunflower, turn left, and head up towards Carrickhill. You got all these new buildings, all these new apartments and car parks and stuff like that. But just before you get to Carrickhill, there's a row of like 3 houses, and they're exactly like the houses on Cockbill Street are described, with like the little small front steps that have been like scrubbed clean and stuff like that. And my mum's auntie used to live in one of those, and they're the last of the original terraced houses in that area, and I think they're due for this destruction, for demolition pretty soon, unfortunately, to make way for more flats. But like that's exactly what I picture when I picture Cockbill Street. So if you're ever on Kent Street in Belfast and those houses are still there, yeah, you'll see what I mean. But
I
yeah,
mean, these are fine people from knee high upwards. Um, I don't know what else to say. It's hard to describe, but it's great, eh?
yeah, it is. I think, and having read a bit of the biography and stuff now, and of the social mobility that Terry experienced, from relatively humble working class beginnings to where he would have been around this time, which is like the UK's best-selling fantasy author. I think, you know, there's a bit of uneasiness about that, I think. And I don't know if it's fair to say, certainly pre-2008, you know, our generation, and well, maybe more so our parents' generation, you know, there were opportunities there for quite a lot of social mobility. But like people like my dad, for example, certainly never would have forgot, and I would have kept a lot of the kind of traits that would have came up growing that way. You know, never would have wasted food, would have still been
Yeah.
quite frugal and all the rest of it. And I think, yeah, having when Vimes goes back to that world, it made me sort of empathize a bit more, maybe with like my parents' generation and like how they would have grown up and how they would have lived, and I could see a lot of that reflected back in this
Quite
section.
cinematic, isn't it? Feels like it's filmed in sepia or black and white.
Yeah, and does a better version of it of the actual black and white Belfast film.
I
Like
imagine
this,
this must be what a Ken Loach film feels like. Oh, I'm sure I've seen some
yeah,
Ken Loach films,
fantasy
yeah.
Ken Loach film. Yeah, I would pay to see that for sure.
Yeah, I would have no problems at all introducing this scene to somebody, or this whole book really.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to
Well,
sort of, and this goes back to what I said with equal rights, to the sort of the fancy literary crowd who would never look at a fantasy novel. I mean, this is for them.
yeah, for
They
sure.
need to
Yeah,
digest this stuff.
and it gets really, really real here. I mean, like a
Do you
child.
hear me, Stranmillis Poetry Clique?
BT9, you'll never catch us in BT9. We're from the streets.
Yeah. We, we should have a
Uh,
Discworld gang sign, like,
yeah,
I don't know, make a D with our hands or something.
this is great radio. Absolutely top-notch radio. Right here. I was, yeah, that got prepare for some tonal whiplash now, because yeah, I mean the whole reason that he's in Cockbill Street though is because a child has died, like,
Yeah.
and it amazed me actually rereading it. You know, with my writer slash script editor hat on, maybe for the first time, and just being like, how do you get away with this? Like, you go in your middle of your comedy fantasy book, there's just like, as part of this criminal investigation, a child has been murdered. It's like, holy shit! Like, it's really, really heavy, and the whole depiction of the funeral and everything. Like you were saying, it's like it's social realism, Ken Loach shit, like, and like how the skill involved in like weaving that into the rest of this fantasy comedic narrative is just, you know, you have to get it right. You have to write it with such authenticity that the reader has no choice but to believe it. Otherwise, it's just going to break this whole book. And he just nails it. Like, it's high stakes, but it's super, super high reward.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't really properly reflected on that, but it is so well done.
Yeah, I hadn't really. It's only on this read that I really thought about that. You know, on the third or fourth time. But you're like, and it's so worth doing, as I say, because for all the reasons I just said, but also like the stakes were high before. Yes, some politician is a bit sick. Maybe these other wankers
So
are going to
what?
take over the city. But like now kids are dying. It's
Yeah.
like, and what that means to Vimes. Like, that's why, you know, because we're seeing those stakes through his eyes and what that means for him. I mean, there's just no going back. This is the point of no return for Vimes.
I know I must have been aware of the heaviness of it, because I mean, I know I was conscious of, right, Vimes has turned up at a funeral of a child and is now about to ask some questions, which is struck me as a very not some Vimes didn't want to do it all.
Yeah,
So yeah, that he's in that precarious position, that definitely came across.
yeah, really, really good internal conflict, because, as you say, it's the version of Vimes that's from those streets, who knows what type of people these are, and that he knows that he shouldn't be intruding on their grief. But then the other part of him that is a policeman, and to the detriment of everything else, you know, he puts that before his own health and his own well-being, and he can't stop himself from kind of doing that with these people as
Yeah,
well.
the
And
clock's
again,
ticking.
yeah, exactly, and he knows that it could mean more people are going to die, so he kind of does the uncomfortable thing. And I was about to say Sean Bean's performance, Jon Culshaw's performance as Sean Bean doing the scene. Yeah, that didn't stray into like a comedic impersonation at all. It was really heartfelt, really well performed, really subtle. You know, in terms of him asking the questions, even though he knows he kind of shouldn't. Like, that sort of came through in the performance, I felt. So yeah, that one of those sections that was definitely elevated for me in the audiobook. Definitely feel I should be getting some sponsorship for this audiobook.
Carrot questions Dorfel, and Vimes interrogates the palace building. Lord Nobby goes to a marvelous party. Traps close in, freedoms are gained. For Colon, as he hits the clue. For Dorfel, who has no master. For Vimes, who goes spare. Yeah, this is the longest bit of my diary, I think.
Yeah, well, a lot of stuff's paying off, and it felt to me on this read as well, like a lot of stuff was paying off maybe a bit earlier than I expected it to, but this meant that some extra crazy escalation was going to be coming down the line. So
Yeah, what I've noticed in this last batch of books is that Terry has pretty much set up his like call to finish about 100 pages before the end of the book, which gives him time to wind things down properly or reach a finale properly and then wind things down. He does tend to have a bit of a formula where he will do he favors two finales, two big resolutions,
yeah,
and then a wind down, and that's all working for me. So this is kind of the big, yes, as you said, the big gear change, big
yep,
acceleration moment.
I haven't talked a lot about Carrot in this book yet, actually. And it sort of opens with his one of the opening set pieces is him taking down the bread factory, and like in all this discussion about nobility and kings and stuff, we've got our whole kind of knowledge of Carrot's divine right of kings, his birthmark and his sword and all that stuff. Like that's all sort of simmering under the surface. But I was gonna say, well, what does he really do to drive the A plot? But he's the early adopter in terms of believing that golems are people, essentially, and that's what kind of, and especially this section, that's what kind of gets us through this section to a degree, or gets us to a place where the likes of Vimes is going to buy into that, and Angua, which is probably the biggest test.
True, carrot be carrot. There's a lot of great Carrot and Angua stuff in this. I feel Terry really put in the work on this. Let's see from the diary. Yes, fascinating. What a power couple. Why Angua wants to leave him is it's really sold. Really taps into how Carrot could be a narrative problem. He's in a sense like Superman. He's a perfect character with no known flaws apart from the sexist clangor, which appears certainly something a bit anomalous. He's been working constantly as a dependable detective, officer, civic diplomat, and he's so fair-minded. It's like an afterthought to him. There are so few threats on his vista. He's like a machine, and if I might be so bold, high-functioning autistic. He cares indiscriminately. Angua's motives for leaving are born out of love for him and herself, also a slither of vanity. She feels a little that he treats her like he does everyone else. Nothing's personal. Consistency in his assets has become a wedge.
Yeah, to quote The Incredibles, if everybody is special, then nobody is. I guess. Yeah, I totally agree. It's quite an unusual character dynamic, for a romantic dynamic, I guess, between characters. But yeah, totally believable and totally born out of that flaw that he's perhaps inadvertently found himself with, where he, the version of Carrot that's in Guards existed to serve that story, and he set that character up in such a way that he can't make him king, obviously. So then the series is kind of dead, or the Watch series is certainly dead. Yeah, in the same way that Superman can't just kill Lex Luthor, except for all the times he actually did do that. But anyway, so
sorry,
yeah. So just so that idea that like Carrot's just gonna bumble around doing the right thing is gonna get old pretty quickly. But the fact that might have a really serious negative impact on his personal relationships, I think, is a really interesting way to tackle it. And it's been done in Superman comics before as well.
And Terry is writing two big stereotypes here that never, are difficult, but doing them so well. So the question I always used to ask myself when I was a young writer hoping to make my way in comics was how would I do Superman? Superman was always a character that I had the problems with. How do you write a character who can do anything? And that's what Carrot can't do anything, but he moves that kind of way.
He sort of
Um,
can, yeah. I mean, yeah,
yeah, and the way Terry gets round out obviously is to make his world really interesting. Um, because he may just be a guy from the mountains, but I mean, Ankh-Morpork is his city now. That's where his home is. Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Because the
the
fish out of
other,
water stuff doesn't play anymore, really. So yeah,
sorry, say again. I talked over you.
I was just gonna say that that fish out of water thing that he had going on in the earlier two books, maybe we're like, well, he's not a fish out of water anymore, like you say. Like Ankh-Morpork is now his city,
Right, you
so
didn't I was going to be so clever with a quick analogy there.
yeah. Sorry, I ruined it. I ruined your flow there,
No,
but
no, I couldn't pronounce Metropolis. Got it.
don't you see?
Um,
Just don't think.
the other thing is that coupling, the the handsome, tall, chiseled male and the woman who's having constant doubts that she's not good enough. And it's such a tired, whiny trope. And Terry absolutely sells it. I think I couldn't actually find my favorite quote when we come on here, but there's one of these. Angua has one of them. It's one of these inner monologues she has about her suitability with Carrot, and
Mm.
it's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, their dynamic's good. I do think, like you were saying, you know, Carrot is a bit old fashioned sometimes, and that whole being raised by dwarfs, even though he's not a fish out of water anymore, he's still a little bit Ned Flandersy, maybe. You know, he's maybe a little
Yeah.
bit too kind of, yeah.
Dougly, Dougly.
I, yeah, I was gonna say repressed. I don't think repressed is fair. He's blinkered, maybe, you know, and he's a bit old fashioned sometimes, and I think that coupled with, yeah, everything we
Yeah,
just
there's a
discussed.
parochialism to him, I think.
Yeah, and that's fair. I believe that. Like, even though he's been in the city for X amount of years at this point, that, like, you know, those core parts of yourself can be difficult to kind of change. And usually this is how they are changed. You know, people that you're in really close relationships with, you challenge you on these things, and that's how you change and grow as a person. And that's what we're seeing here between him and Angua. And yeah, it's great. And
Yeah, she
again,
makes a point that he's stubborn.
mm,
There's a yeah, that sort of normality is stubbornly normal.
yeah, for sure. I think that that line, he cares indiscriminately, that you've quoted in your diary, that kind of sums it up, you know. And I think there was a lot of that in Terry as well, you know, where, like, he, if something was wrong, even if it didn't affect him directly or personally, like, it would make him angry. Like, and he puts quite a lot of it in Vimes, but then he puts it in Carrot too. And I think Angua even remarks on that in the book, that Vimes has put the words in Carrot's head like a golem, kind of, and he's sort of picked up that mantle. Um, Bit more Earl Knobs, the party. We had a bit of a chuckle about that.
Yes, I love what's been done with Nobbs in this book. He's kind of like Nanny Og with all her charm sucked out. And then he's in among the elites, and it's in fair dirt. Their charm was sucked out long ago with Nobby filling it up or sucking them in like a black hole of gregariousness. I'm wondering if the elites who sampled the Nobby lifestyle suffered dreadful hangovers. And then meanwhile, we get Vimes would go spare, which enters my own pantheon of resonant one liners fit for a mantra.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
It does make me think of that Divine Comedy number I've been to a Marvelous Party.
oh yeah, it's a good song. Yeah, I do think, yeah, that, but there is something kind of the classical literature in that, isn't there, of the commoner being the belle of the ball when it comes to, like, and there's nobody more common than Nobby, as like Vimes continue and Colon both continuously remind us in the book. But it's great to see him get his moment in the sun, and some really vivid
Yeah.
mental images painted there. And since we know I think regardless of what happens in the rest of the book, we all know in our heart of hearts that this is never going to last for Nobby. So you just kind of want to enjoy the ride with him for as long as it lasts. And oh yeah, the nanny og comparison. I can see that. You can see like the dirty jokes that he likes, the little sort of nods and winks tend to go to your nobbies and your nannies in these books. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I see you've even made a note of it. You see, you were ahead of the game in this one. In your
Ah,
diary, you've written, "Did Dragon fake Knobs being an Earl?" Question mark. Page 291, which I think is a little bit before the reveal, but I think
ah.
you've sniffed it out. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to offer him a prize or something.
Oh, that feels bad because I think in the next part I've written that I had no idea that Dragon was, or I couldn't work out who's behind the assassination. So I
Yeah,
sniffed somebody. Yeah.
but what's clever um, about this is that even if Dragon did fake Knobs being an Earl, it doesn't necessarily connect him to the assassination attempt in this part. So like these little twists and breadcrumbs that are kind of, they haven't quite started coming together, but you still feel good as a reader if you kind of start, drawing connections and stuff, even if you don't have the whole picture. I think that really helps keep you engaged in the whole mystery element of it. So yeah, well done you, and well done Terry. Well done everybody.
Before we, is it possibly before Nobby? Yes, before Nobby goes to the party, we get him and Colon deciding to go on door-to-door inquiries just so that they look like they're doing
Uh,
police work. And that's quite a circuitous route to moving the story on to get Colon placed in some danger.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean,
And I really enjoyed that because I've been waiting for a Colon moment. I feel I've got tastes of the character, but not really enough not enough that I deserve on this.
yeah,
Seeing him as a central part of an action romp, it's really
yeah,
good
for
fun.
sure. And you have to remember as well that there's the big flashing red light of he's a cop who's just about to retire. So every time he gets into the slightest amount of danger,
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
what could happen? And then when the inevitable does happen, it's just really gross and funny instead.
And it's a pretty it's a I mean there's a small film treatment I think in Colon Arthur.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that for
Unlikely
sure.
duo. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can really see. I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but it wouldn't have been too long after this that they would have been starting to kick around ideas for the original version of the Watch TV series, and which Terry was involved with, which was meant to be a bit more, CSI story of the week, which was the style of the time, which is what TV was in the late 90s and early 2000s, much more self-contained, and you can
Was
kind
that a
of see.
Professor Frink imitation?
I think
Which
it
was
was.
the style of the
I
time.
think it was meant to be Grandpa Simpson, but yeah, it was in that Matt Groening kind of space anyway, whatever it
Simpsons
was.
verse. Yeah.
Yeah, um,
That would have been great.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you can see, yeah, little like one-off character pairings like that, would have been great for a TV show like that, but it just, time passed us by, unfortunately, in a number of ways.
Oh, so yeah, this is where Carrot grants Dorfel his freedom, which is a very Carrot sort of thing to do. And we get some really existential poetry
Mm,
across a couple of pages, um, which I think there's got to be a lot of people's favorite quotes in there, I think.
yeah. Jon Culshaw really belts it out on the recording as well. He's like up here for the whole monologue. It's great. Um, yeah, and the huge irony in the golems wanted to build themselves a king so that the king would make them free. And then Carrot, who is, as we all know, the actual king, is the one who ends up setting Torfil free, I guess.
Oh,
So there's a bit of irony there. I'm not sure if it
well
really
thought out, sir.
goes any deeper than that necessarily, but yeah, it's nice just to have Carrot do something kingly every now and again, just to kind of remind you that like that's who he is. Gets his Superman moments.
Oh, the attempt to frame Vimes coming back by slipping some bear huggers into his
Yeah.
drawers. Um, so it's clear that Vimes saw this coming a long way off, and
Yeah.
the sobriety does agree with him. Says how he dispatches his accusers and solves the mystery seems like he and Carrot rubbing off on each other, or that's maybe to undersell Vimes. He's been so thorough throughout the investigation. It's certainly Vetinari rubbing off on him. It's a nice turn the trope on its head of the drunken detective as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And just what you said there about Vetinari, I think it's Vetinari's last line possibly in the whole book where Dromnot says to him, you know, if Vimes didn't exist, we'd have to create him. And Vetinari just said, I think I did. You know, so
Yeah,
all
that's
this has kind of,
really scary. I mean, the
yeah,
was it what was the last book? Men at Arms. There's that
mm,
line about being in danger of snapping, stretching Vimes so much he'll snap,
yeah.
which makes me quite afraid for their relationship because I don't think Vetinari's going to come off at all well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'd sort of forgotten that there was so much tension between them in these books. And yeah, that sort of really that last page reveal essentially that like yeah, Vetinari has kind of been trying to shape Vimes quite actively to his own ends. It's not a surprise by any means, but as you say, it sort of feels like the sort of thing that could end up putting them on a collision
It's playing
course,
playing
inevitably.
about with dynamite, really.
Yeah, for both of them. Yeah,
So the bear huggers was placed there by one of the guild's heads, or a few of them, wasn't it?
that is my recollection.
Yeah.
Is that
Um,
that's the yeah part of their is yeah part of the plan is to get Vimes off scene by essentially yeah getting them back down to the bottom of the bottle and then framing him. Yeah, I mean, it's for somebody who writes so joyously about alcohol and drinking, like he writes quite. I don't want to imply it's from experience at all, but I mean, he does write quite poignantly about alcoholism as well. You know, the way that Vimes feels and like his that moment when he sees it and what it means to him and what drinking it would mean to him and what not drinking it means to him all feels like it really comes from somewhere. But then like 50 pages before, we've got like two intercutting pub scenes where everybody's getting pissed and having the crack and like yeah, it's interesting. I would definitely wouldn't be fair to speculate on any of the reasonings behind that, except that he's just a bloody good writer, I suppose. You know.
yeah, it's a wonderfully conscious, aware writer.
Indeed. Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure you know, as all the best writers are, just complete sponges. You know, social sponges and cultural sponges, and just able to turn that around and put it back out there in a way that just sucks us straight into it. It's just masterful. Part 5. Sergeant Colon rides the bills. A daring raid on the candle factory puts Cheri's life in jeopardy. Dragon King takes on well. The patrician discusses with Vimes the delivery of messages. Dorfel joins the watch. The Golem Revolution. I like how you described that. So the first line of Andy's notes following part 5. Yeah, like if we were reading about it in a history book, that's what this Feet of Clay, fine, decent enough title for a book. The Golem Revolution. Now there's a title for a book.
I'm not going to question the master.
No, and also it gives far too much of the game away anyway. It's not much of a mystery if you put that on the front cover.
What I was leading into there is that it'd be interesting that we get, like, what if there's a veterinary or others hand down these social problems, and that Carrot struggles to solve that as a kind of a social or a policy based mystery story. And actually, by the time I got to the end of this diary entry, I pretty much conceded that it's probably Carrot does it, but Vimes definitely is on it. He's going through that.
Mm. Yeah, because I to go back to the Superman analogy for Kara, I suppose you know the weakness of both those characters is their kind of naivety to an extent. You know their inherent nature, which is always to do good. Like when that rubs up against the reality of a Lord Vetinari or a Lex Luthor, you know it's the moral quandary rather than any kind of physical test that's gonna stump them.
Oh,
So yeah,
I know, Vetinari's not supposed to be a villain, but the Lex Luthor analogy does sound fitting.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how the characters are portrayed, in terms of like a kind of middle-aged white man with almost limitless resources who is always sort of one step ahead of everybody else, except that one person, like Lex Luthor's meant to always be one step ahead of everybody except Superman. I think Vetinari, certainly in these books, is kind of one step ahead of everybody except Vimes, maybe, or sometimes except Carrot, until the very last line of this book, almost, where we realize actually maybe that's part of his whole grand plan. But yeah, I think that sort of dynamic works really well in these kind of stories.
So according to my notes, I hadn't twigged Mr. Carey the candle maker was behind stuff.
Mm,
Um, I have suggested it might have been the city guard who preceded the watch in their powers. I thought it might have been the Alchemist Guild because of their relation to Cheri. Uh,
mm,
I hadn't figured it was dragon,
mm.
even though we know it's a vampire and there's only one vampire in the book. I couldn't think if we'd had a vampire, because I suppose dragon isn't. When we meet him at the start, he isn't performative in that
Yeah,
aspect, apart from just being a bit of a presence. And
yeah,
actually, am I right in remembering that that scene with the coat of arms takes place in daylight, but obviously they're undercover?
yeah, in the
Um,
dark. But yeah, I say in daytime, but in a dark room. Yeah, no, I think a couple of things really play in uh, to making this work. Yeah, as you say, having dragon being, it's stated outright that he's a vampire, but he doesn't do anything vampire-y when we first meet him. Because we're in Discworld, where like characters can be anything, any creature we want to be. It's almost just
yeah.
by the by that he's a vampire at the start. The fact that Angua and Cheri go to the Uberwald bar, where it's like, yes, remember all these creatures exist, vampires exist, boogeymen exist. We get these little reminders throughout the book that like that aspect of fantasy, like the the horror aspect of fantasy, the werewolves, the vampires, all those people, they are in the mix. So when the suspect is a vampire, you're like, oh yeah, well that could be anybody because we've just spent this time, for example, in this bar where vampires potentially hang out. So it doesn't have to be the only vampire that we've met because of that. And then the fact that Dragon is so intrinsically wrapped up in this storyline with the coat of arms, which is like, to me, a comedy kind of C story at the start. The fact that he's going to be step out of that and become like the main suspect in the A story, that's what helps. That's what keeps him disguised for so long, because you're laughing at those bits, with the hippos standing to attention and with Nobby and all that. That's all for gags up until it's not,
Yeah.
and that's
He's
yeah,
a genuinely sinister villain. And
yeah,
actually, I'm
yeah,
just remembering that as far as I've gotten, he's still out in Ankh-Morpork or somewhere on the disc.
yeah.
And that's a bit chilling to think of.
Yeah, the
Um,
last scene with him, yeah, with Vimes, well, it's just him and Vimes and Dorful's waiting in the wings, I guess, is genuinely chilling scene. Good performance again on the audiobook too, but like, yeah, the tension, and you're like, you just believe that this guy is capable of doing, or this guy, this vampire is pretty much capable of anything really by that point. And I think really when Vimes walks into the room that he's not on his own, even though they make a point of saying there's nobody else there. Dorful's not a person, and obviously we've been building up to Dorful saving the day, so it's a nice cathartic moment, and you still feel the tension all running through that scene.
and there's a lot of building up of Colon's resolution because we've got the bulls, the wonderful explanation of why bulls look both ways.
Yeah,
Um, it's just superb. We've got Mad Arthur riding on a chicken's back. We got Dorfel with his own little revolution, just setting all the animals free.
mm,
And so by the end of it, Colon's, screw this. I've had enough managing animals for one day
yeah,
and winding up in their poop and yeah.
yeah. For the rest of his life, I think he's had enough of it. Yeah, and it is. I mean, I don't think we ever really believe that like he's gonna come to any serious harm during that section because of how funny it is. But yeah, the whole kind of retired cop on his last mission or on his last case thing is always just sitting there at the back of your mind, or I think it's supposed to be anyway, you know. But that, yeah, the whole business with Dorfel, all, yeah, I was about to say it's subtext. It's not subtext because like they have a literal conversation about it in this section about like why the animals don't run away, or why the golems want to rebuild the treadmill after he smashes it, and like sort of the nature of freedom and what it means to be free and all that kind of stuff. I think gets pretty heavy, you know, it gets pretty philosophical again, like right there at the end. In a good way. I mean, I think all those themes are certainly there the whole way through, so it feels natural for them to have that conversation for sure.
So we get into the big end battle at the candle makers factory. Surprised me a bit that Angua and Carrot and Cheri were gonna go ahead. Carrot said, "Let's go on in. Don't wait for Vimes." Surprised me to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, a really good big set end piece. Uh,
I hadn't
there's
thought
a
of that
moment.
actually, yeah. By Carrot, you know, it's a bit plot expedient that Carrot's just like, yeah, let's just go in. Like, is he buy the books? He's the buy the books guy, so should he not wait for backup? Yeah, it's interesting point.
There's I was as I said, I speed read this. Well, didn't feel like it, but I couldn't put it down. And I was in a meeting. I was just going into a meeting on a Discord. So I was looking at somebody on the camera, and I had the book in front of me, and um, I noticed people started to come into the meeting, so I had to put the book down, and I let my eyes drop like about 4 lines to the death of Dorfel.
Oh yeah,
And I
and then you
was
had to
like,
stop.
what the hell? And I just had this, like, people must have known something was up. I just had this expression on my face of just utter shock. And I didn't know what had happened in the 4 lines that we could get to where the lights went out in Dorfel's eyes. But I had to put my book away for about 75 minutes
Oh no,
and
torture.
just cope with that.
Yeah, that'll teach you to skip ahead in future. Yeah, yeah, it's a good. I mean, it's again a little bit like gas mode where you know, yes, you got the moment where he's gone for good, but then he comes back, and I think you know the tone of this world is solidified. Yes, we had some pretty serious stuff in this book, but we don't spend that much time with characters like Gaspode or Dorfel and let them die. Really, it's not. Yeah, it's not as dark a world as that, even though it does get serious sometimes. So yeah, it's a nice moment when he comes back and he reaches out to save Carrot, and yeah, I had to hesitating for spoilers again, but it's like you
It's
sort of
satisfyingly epic. I think
yeah,
this
good,
whole thing.
yeah, and then
It's the Golem King feels like a real serious threat.
mm,
So
again,
I completely bought into Dorfel biting the bullet.
oh yeah, for sure, and the description of that fight is strays into the horror a bit. I mean, I love it when he can do a bit of good body horror with like the light splashing out from underneath its body, its skin essentially, and like that it's not made properly is, but it's
Yeah.
still humanoid and stuff is quite creepy, quite frightening.
He's
I
pretty
also
much
think,
taken down Superman.
well,
Well,
yeah, it's there's definitely Death of Superman vibes going on here, isn't there? Like, uh, yeah,
Andrew's
great sequence.
save of Cheri is another fantastic piece as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
and it's just such good. Like you could use that in a writing lesson, you know, in terms of setup and payoff, where you know that Angua has to reveal herself as a werewolf to Cheri at some point in the book, and what are the highest possible stakes for that to happen. So it's literally life or death. Yeah, and yeah, you could use that as an example in a creative writing workshop all day long. Good ending, great satisfying
Yeah.
book. Oh yeah, I wanted to come back to Visit again. You've mentioned it in your notes about you know the building of the kind of tertiary characters and how the likes of Visit are elevated, and Like that was me. Like that was like catnip to me when I was a teenager reading this. Was like all the big discussions about like religion versus atheism, and Dorfald taking on Constable Visit and taking on the priests and Ridgely, having these like debates about the existence of gods and stuff like that. That I just loved all that stuff when I was as a kid. I'd have debated that. I'd have been like Dorfall. I would have debated it with anybody, and we probably did on MSN Messenger back in the day.
Yeah. So we get into that. Dorfel has joined the watch, and I'm so happy with that finale. And it really looks, you can't give spoilers, but it really looks to me like we're gonna get some Constable Visit and Constable Dorfel back and forward. There's he's a really good ambassador for atheism. I'm not an atheist, I'm a polytheist, so I'm completely the other way. Um, but there's some good arguments. I think I found my quote as well
Oh,
for
nice.
this episode. So yeah, some really good character building throughout here.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, while we're on the subject of quotes, do you want to throw it out there then while you've got
oh
it?
yeah, let's do it. A true atheist thinks of the gods constantly.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that was an idea that he was noodling with in Small Gods for sure, but it's just nailed it succinctly there. Yeah, beautiful. Love that one. Um, yeah, so I didn't want to jump the gun. I nearly said mine earlier when we were talking about that sequence of
I'll go for it.
Dorfall freeing everybody, but the conversation he then has with Vimes about it, is it frightening to be free? You said it. You say that people throw off your chains and they make new chains for themselves. Seems to be a major human activity. Yes. A little bit. I feel like I've been choosing some downer quotes. Maybe I might have to make an effort to try to choose some funny ones going forward. But I do think that like those are the things that stay with me with this world. Is like, yes, there's loads of great jokes and stuff, but it's those kind of quotes. It's the kind of poignant moments that kind of maybe stay with me a bit longer once I'm finished with a read. Especially considering where we are. The presidential debate is in about 6 hours, I think, from now. So, all that chat of like freedom and self determination and all that feels quite topical.
There's a couple other points I wanted to bring up, and that was Carrot and Anga's decision not to break up with them and
Ah, yes, of
leave
course.
Ankh-Morpork, and that struck me as a bit, I mean, believable. I'll accept it from the author, but a bit sort of a bit of a downer because she had kind of resolved to do what she was going to do. She had thought through it, and she seems to kind of resign on weakness from doing it. And I totally want them to stay together, um, but it
Yeah,
seemed like a step backwards for that character, which is fine because it's a story. Characters can't step backwards. It's just kind of sad to have it at the end of a story.
yeah, I think it feels a little bit like he maybe blinked on that one, like he was maybe committing to her leaving and changed his mind, or was maybe got feedback that he should change his mind, or that should be changed. I don't know. Because yeah, I would agree with that. It takes a little bit of Angua's agency away. She's made this decision, and that's the kind of to stand on her own. I was about to say on her own 2 feet, on her own four paws, maybe. Uh, but she was going to, assert her independence and her own agency as a character, and then to have her character journey end with deciding not to do that, it does. It sort of
Yeah.
it does
Particularly as
rub the
she's
script
been
editor a little bit.
guiding Cheri to do that very thing.
Yeah, and I wonder, is that meant to be the point? It doesn't quite work for me, but is it the fact that like she's kind of had that journey sort of vicariously through Chiri? Does that mean her that she's kind of
Yeah,
seen
that could be it.
what
I do feel the same, like there's a point here that I'm missing.
it's that does still feel like a bit of a reach to me, because I think if you you set a character up with a goal at the start of the story, and it's again fairly typical storytelling to have them realize to go on a character journey that makes their initial original goal irrelevant. Like that's not what they needed. That was just what they wanted. They needed something else. So yeah, Angua thought that she needed independence from Carrot at the start, But what I don't really understand at the end is like, what did she need? Did she need a friend? Is that what it is? Did she find, did she fulfill her need by making a real connection with Cheri instead? I don't know. They don't feel cohesive enough. I don't think maybe enough was done to connect those two elements, if that is the case. But I mean, there's a hell of a lot of other stuff going on in this book. So many good character relationships, so many intricate dynamics at play. If one of them is sitting at 70% instead of 90%, I mean, who
I
can,
mean,
who can say?
I guess you're not going to tell me because that's the rules, but there's so much interesting Angua Carrot relationship stuff done. It could be that Terry has decided, well, I would like to return to this well at some point in the future, and all these doubts, and how does Lois Lane, even if she can turn into a werewolf, cope with Superman?
Yeah, for sure. Um, and like we always have to give Terry the benefit of the doubt because he's a much better writer than us. But I do think it would have been possible to do that had she still left, because she could have come back and look what kind of complications and strains would her leaving have put on their relationship. I think that could have been interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I do feel it's maybe one slightly weak element, but there, as usual, he's doing so much stuff, and most of it's operating like up at a 9 out of 10. Like this resolution sitting at maybe a 7 out of 10 for me, but that's such a small quibble.
How do we feel about Vetinari and Vimes in the palace? And I'm quite sure how I feel, and it's really odd because any other writer that I can think of, I would have had a wag the finger bit of criticism about how long this scene goes on between them, how much exposition there is, in which, like, who murdered who and how it was done. But I'm reading this sequence. I'm, yeah, aware of all this, and it just feels like I'm enjoying it. I'm just fine spending all this extra time with this quality writer, this beloved writer. It's confident. It passes any technical how tos or must dos. Um,
Yeah,
I think that's the only way I can explain why it works for me.
yeah. I mean, those are the kind of scenes that I would tend to be a bit down on, maybe. But I think scenes like that tend to grow long in Discworld books, just because Terry loves writing Vetinari for sure, and he definitely loves writing Vimes. So like, but yeah, when they get in the room together, I think the words just keep coming, and for as long as they're funny, I think that's fine. They should. I think the reason why the scene doesn't get or doesn't fall flat is because there is still an inherent tension in that what's what's Vetinari gonna do? Like, what's the outcome gonna be for him? Is he gonna punish Vimes? It's the ending scene of the last two City Watch books where like, which way is Vetinari gonna fall? Is he gonna support? Is he gonna back Vimes, or is he gonna throw him under the bus? Is he going to allow Dorfel to live? I think that's actually a big one in that scene, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is
So when
Dorfel going to be allowed to remain as a watchman and to remain as a golem? And the fact that Vimes has to stand up to him, I think that those kind of like moments of conflict between them throughout the scene keep it alive. Because I think by this
and the
point we did,
dartboard.
yeah, and that's a callback to
Yeah,
Guard Scars.
guys.
Yeah, so I think yeah, that's kind of hanging a lantern on it a bit by Terry. Like he knows that these stories do tend to resolve in that specific way, to the point where that even Vetinari knows that he has to get
Yeah.
the dartboard.
Yeah, there's so much in this scene. I mean, there's a whole expositioning thing, but there's also elements like the axe that's been planted in the table where
Yeah.
the guild heads meet, and how Vetinari has just decided not to remove it. He's just going to leave it
Yeah,
there.
I quite enjoy that scene takes place sort of off camera, as it were. That we don't follow Vimes as he does that, but like we don't have to. We know exactly how that would have played out.
Yeah.
And the reveal is much funnier. Yeah, yeah, it is handled well. It is a long scene, and I do think it's worth, when you've had a multi-level kind of procedural thing with multiple murders and a political plot and everything. There is no harm just summing it up a little bit at the end, just so everybody can sort of breathe out and go, yes, I understood that, I got it, I followed it. All the kind of questions I had have been answered. Even if you have figured it all out, it's, you know, that little moment of release, of catharsis at the end, I think is good. Especially because this is not really marketed as like a really like hard-boiled detective thing. It's still meant to be a comedy fantasy book at the end of the day, so there's no begrudging of a little exposition from me, certainly at the end of something like that. You know, I think certainly 14-year-old me would have appreciated it at the time. Probably find it a little bit hard to follow in places.
I think I will be back to this novel in some shape or other. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to talk about from it?
No, not really. I mean, it remains one of my favorites for all the reasons we've just discussed at length. It's got me like, this is the level I think where the guards books stay for a good while. That's about just, I'm not saying anything more than that, but I mean, this, yeah, like these are the kind of books where like when I was reading as a kid, I would have devoured them in the way that you devoured them. I would have been sitting at the back of the classroom reading it, you know, like you sitting on your Zoom meetings reading it, you know. Occasionally I would have got to the last page and just gone straight back to the start and opened it again. You know, this is absolute peak Discworld for me.
Yeah. Yeah, just a solid joy. Okay, so next time we are going to do something a little, well, for the next two episodes, we're going to do something a little different. We're both back at university. PJ is starting his PhD, and I'm starting my regular support worker job. So we are going to, next month, we're going to delve into a blink of the screen, is it called?
Yeah, some short stories. So that's the printed short story collection. Some of them exist in various places online in other publications. So if you're interested in listening along with us as we discuss a couple of the short stories, as always, go to Lspace as your first port of call, or hit up the Discworld Reddit, and you can find some legal avenues for reading the stories that we're
We
going to
are
look
going
at.
to go for Trollbridge, and what's the other one called? The Fishes. It's a witch's story. It's about 50 pages long.
It's the plan.
And we're also going to look at the fan film of Trollbridge as well.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about that for years. I've actually never read either of the. No, sorry, that's a lie. I have read Trollbridge. I haven't read the other story, and I haven't seen the fan film. So, yeah, looking forward to digging into some new material. Yeah, that's gonna be fun. Yeah, so basically the other reason we're doing this, yes, we're both very busy with working for our masters at Ulster University, but sorry, I mean literal, actual physical masters, not master's degrees, our human masters. But the other reason is because we've got a bit of a clever timing thing that we want to do for Christmas, don't we?
Oh, very clever, very clever. Christmas coming up, so we are going to do Hogfather, and we're going to celebrate it a bit. Details to be announced, but it's going to be a great episode as well.
Indeed.
And in between them, I think we're going to do Guards, the graphic novel.
Yeah, I think I might have it.
Oh, we've got it. I have yet to order it, although my copy of Trollbridge and the Sea and Fishes is on its way.
I just put my new bookshelves up, so I know it's on there somewhere, but it's in a dark corner of the room that I don't want to turn the big lights on. But yes, it exists. It's in this room. I know I've made that promise before. I've seen it within the week this time. I know it's in this room. So yeah, that's going to be fun. I'm a big fan. Obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, but yeah, it's a great comic. And
have you anything you'd like to plug, PJ?
Do I? I do actually, yeah. So I was a bit coy at the end of the last episode about an upcoming announcement. So the good people at BBC Northern Ireland have announced their new comedy and drama slate for autumn, which includes a short comedy film called Country Rogues, co-written by myself and Owen Cleland, directed by Owen Cleland, starring Oscar-winning actor James Martin. You may know from the Oscar-winning short film An Irish Goodbye. So it's a short comedy about James wanting to start James's character wanting to start a Down syndrome country band. So that should be up on BBC iPlayer imminently. We don't have a specific date yet, but the announcement is up, so that should be imminent. We can put that on socials, maybe chat about it again next month. But it's something we made this time last year. We shot it last October, so we're really, really excited that it's finally something that we're going to be able to share. So yeah, we'll make a bit of noise with links to that. It's kind of it, actually. Yeah.
Super. This is Owen Cleland, who you worked with previously, and with James on the Ash concert tour film.
Yeah, Ups and Downs. Yeah.
Ups and Downs, yeah. And if you see that on YouTube or anywhere else, grab a hold of it, because that's a great film or short.
Yeah, it's like a 45-minute TV movie. Yeah, so similar. Yeah, if you liked Ups and Downs, you'll definitely like Country Roads. We got to lean in. We were allowed to lean into the comedy. Owen and I both big comedy fans, and we got to lean into that a little bit more, even though it's much shorter. Still had a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do a little bit more with it. If all you lovely people go and watch it and tell the internet and the BBC how much you love it and all that good stuff, that would help us out a lot.
I'm still doing my 200-second Sunny videos on YouTube on a Sunday. Just tomorrow, so it'll be a week or 2 weeks for some of you, I'm debuting my press gang commentary series.
He's got the DVDs. He's holding the DVDs up.
Got the DVDs. That's how serious this is. I'm
Is there any other way to watch Press Gang? I don't think there is. Like, you have to have the DVDs or maybe the VHS. I think those are the only options.
I'm doing sort of like mini documentaries on each episode, but there's also a biographical feature, so they tend to be between 15 and 20 minutes each, almost as long as an episode itself.
Awesome.
The other big announcement just came through my door yesterday is this. It's a proof copy of my next book, Coastlines After Dark,
Awesome.
which will be out sometime in October. I will definitely have an announcement for you next time. I've been writing all over it, and now I just have to take to the screen and implement those changes. So, but it's easily my favorite part of editing, when you have a print copy in your hands, and it's a good size, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I love the cover as well. Hold it still a wee minute.
This is just for the video watchers. This is just Sean Duffield's sketch at the moment. But yes, he's hard at work and finishes.
The Baywatch Nights vibes from that. That's awesome.
I'd just like to thank our friends all across Twitter and elsewhere for watching, liking, listening, telling other people, sharing. I'd like to thank top patrons, Artemy K, Arsalan Hyder Ali, Ian Lawther in particular, who goes halfers on the Zoom bill, which allows us to do this. And that's about it. I mean, we're on Twitter at Discord GNU, also on Facebook, same address. I love reading Discworld.
I'm so happy to be back in the midst of the City Watch Discworld books, but I'm looking forward to stretching our legs, some short stories, some fan stuff. Yeah, it's great to be really immersed up to my neck in this stuff again. So thanks for sticking with us, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.